While we were eating dinner at the house my father left me, my husband said, I think you should move out. The house is in my name. It has always been in my name. My father left it to me when he passed 5 years ago. It was the house I grew up in. When he got sick, he sat me down at the kitchen table and told me the house was mine, and that I should never put anyone else's name on it. He said that twice. I promised him. When I married Teo 2 years later, I told him the house was mine and would stay in my name only. He said he understood. He said he was marrying me, not a piece of property. He moved in after the wedding, and for the first year everything was fine. He paid half the utilities. I paid the mortgage, which was almost nothing because my father had nearly paid it off before he died. Teo had a good job in insurance when we met. 6 months into the marriage, he got laid off. He said it was temporary. I picked up extra hours at the hospital where I worked as a nurse and covered everything while he looked. He looked for about 3 weeks. Then he stopped and started staying home. Games online, shows all day. He ate what I bought and slept in the bed I paid for and called it a mental health break. That break lasted 9 months. During those 9 months, I paid for everything. Every bill, every grocery run, every tank of gas in his car, even though he had nowhere to go. I came home from 12-hour shifts and he was on the couch in the same spot. He didn't cook or clean or do laundry. He ordered takeout with my card and left the containers for me to throw away. I said something once and he told me I was nagging and the least I could do was be supportive. I was paying every bill and working doubles and he told me the least I could do was be supportive. At the 1 year mark, I told Teo he needed to find a job. Any job. I said I couldn't keep doing this alone. He got angry and said I didn't understand the pressure he was under. I asked him what pressure. He didn't answer. His mother Delphina called me and said I needed to be patient because men process things differently. I said, did you also pay for everything while he sat on the couch for 9 months? She hung up. Teo got a job 14 months after losing the first one. A car rental place. Less than half what I made. He started paying for his own gas but never once helped with the mortgage or utilities. He said since the house was in my name, those were my responsibility. My responsibility when it was time to pay, but his home when it was time to live in it. Then his friend Nando moved to our city and needed a place to stay. Teo told him he could crash with us for a while. He didn't ask me. He told me the night Nando showed up with a duffel bag and a pillow. I said this was my house and he couldn't invite people to live here without asking. He said, it's our home. Stop acting like I'm a guest. Nando stayed for 6 weeks. He slept on the couch and ate my food and used my bathroom and left wet towels on the floor. When I told Teo that Nando needed to leave, he said I was being controlling. When I told Nando directly, he looked at Teo like he was waiting for permission. Teo shrugged and said, she's in one of her moods. Nando left the next day. And that's when Teo decided the marriage wasn't working. Not when he sat on my couch for 9 months without a job. Not when he ate food I paid for and didn't clean up after himself. Not when he moved a stranger into my house without asking. The marriage stopped working the moment I enforced a boundary. He sat me down after dinner on a Thursday. I had worked a 14-hour shift and my feet were swollen and I had barely eaten. He looked at me across the table in the kitchen where my father told me to never put another name on the deed, and he said, I think you should move out. I asked him to repeat that. He said, this isn't working and I think it would be better if you found your own place for a while. He said it calmly, like he had practiced it, like he had been rehearsing this speech the same way he rehearsed reasons not to work for 14 months. I said, this is my house. He said, it's our home. We built this together. We didn't build anything together. My father built this. I maintained it. Teo just lived in it. I told him I wasn't going anywhere. He said if I wasn't willing to compromise, then maybe we needed to have a bigger conversation. I said, the bigger conversation is that you're sitting in a house you don't pay for, telling the woman who owns it to leave. He called Delphina. She called me within the hour and said I was being selfish and that marriage means sharing everything and that holding the house over Teo's head was cruel. I said, he hasn't paid a mortgage payment in 2 years and he just asked me to move out of the house my dead father left me. She said I was always throwing that in his face. I wasn't throwing anything. I was stating facts that nobody wanted to hear. I told Teo to leave. He smirked and said, you can't do that. I said, I can, and I am. This house is in my name. Only my name. You are not on the deed. You are not on the mortgage. You have no legal claim to this property. My father left it to me and I am asking you to leave it. He stopped smirking. He sat there for a second and then he said, we're married. That makes it marital property. I said, no it doesn't. Inherited property stays separate unless you commingle it. I never did. My attorney told me that 2 years ago when I asked. That was the first time I saw real fear on his face. Not the performative panic he put on when he lost his job. Not the exaggerated stress he used as an excuse for 14 months. Real fear. The kind that comes when you realize the floor you've been standing on belongs to someone else and they just told you to get off it. He said, you talked to a lawyer? I said, I talked to a lawyer the week you moved Nando in without asking me. I sat in her office on my lunch break and I showed her the deed and the mortgage and the inheritance documents and she told me exactly what my rights were. She told me this house is my separate property and that no marriage certificate changes that as long as I never added your name, and I never did, because my father told me not to. And my father was right about you before I even knew you existed. He went quiet. His jaw moved like he was chewing on something but nothing came out. He looked around the kitchen like he was seeing it for the first time. The cabinets my father installed by hand one Saturday when I was 12 years old, and I handed him screws while he measured everything twice. The tile my father laid on his hands and knees over a 3-day weekend while my mother made him coffee, and they listened to music on a radio that sat on the counter. The window over the sink that my father replaced the year before he died because he said the draft was bothering me when I did the dishes. He drove to the hardware store in his bathrobe that morning because he wanted it fixed before I came home from work. Every inch of that kitchen was my father's work. His hands built it. His money paid for it. His love maintained it for 31 years. And Teo was sitting in it. A man who hadn't paid a single mortgage payment, who hadn't tightened a single hinge, who hadn't fixed a single leak, telling the woman whose father built every wall around him to pack her things and go. I said, you have until the end of the month. He said, you're not serious. I said, I have never been more serious about anything in my life. He called Delphina again. I could hear her voice through his phone even though it wasn't on speaker. She was loud. She was saying things about respect and commitment and how marriages go through hard times and how a real wife would stand by her husband. Teo held the phone toward me like her voice was supposed to change my mind, like his mother's opinion opinion carried more weight in my father's house than mine did. I said, Delphina, your son sat on my couch for 14 months without working, ate my food, spent my money, moved his friend into my house without permission, and just asked me to leave the house my dead father left me. If you want to house him, your door is open, but he's not staying here. Teo took the phone back. Delphina was still talking when he hung up. The next morning I went to work. I did a 12-hour shift in the ICU. I helped a family say goodbye to their father. I held a woman's hand while she waited for test results. I changed IV bags and updated charts and ate a granola bar in the break room at 2 p.m. and that was lunch. When I drove home, I stopped at the grocery store because the refrigerator was nearly empty. Because Teo had been eating everything without replacing anything for 2 years, and old habits die harder than marriages. When I pulled into the driveway and walked to the front door, Teo had done something I did not expect. He had changed the locks. My keys didn't work. I stood on my own front porch at 8:30 at night after a 12-hour shift with swollen feet and a bag of groceries, and my house key wouldn't turn. I put the groceries down on the step and tried it again. Nothing. I tried the back door. Same thing. New deadbolt. New knob. He had changed every lock on a house he didn't own. I called him. He answered on the second ring, sounding calm, sounding rehearsed, sounding like Delphina had coached him through the night. I said, why can't I get into my house? He said, I changed the locks. If you want to play the eviction game, we can play it both ways. I said, you changed the locks on a house you don't own. He said, possession is 9/10 of the law. He said that like he'd heard it in a movie and believed it was an actual legal principle. I hung up and called the police. I called them from my own porch sitting on the step next to my groceries while the ice cream I bought melted inside the bag. The officer arrived 20 minutes later. He was calm and professional. I showed him the deed with my name on it and only my name. I showed him my ID with the address. I showed him the mortgage statement in my name. I showed him the old keys that no longer worked and the new locks that someone else installed on my property without my knowledge or consent. The officer knocked on the door. Teo opened it looking confident, like he was about to explain his side, and the officer would see it his way, like he thought the badge would work in his favor because he was the man in the house, and that counted for something. The officer asked if he was on the deed. Teo said no. The officer asked if he was on the mortgage. Teo said no. The officer asked if he had any legal documentation showing ownership or tenancy rights to the property. Teo said, I'm her husband. I live here. The officer said that didn't answer his question. He asked again. Teo had nothing. No document, no lease, no written agreement, nothing but a marriage certificate and a set of locks he installed on a house that belonged to someone else. Teo's confidence cracked. He looked past the officer at me sitting on the porch step with my grocery bags and my swollen feet, and I think he realized for the first time that being married to someone and owning their house are two entirely different things. My father knew the difference. Teo never learned it. The officer told Teo to give me the new keys immediately. Teo handed them over without a word. The officer asked me if I wanted to file a report. I said yes. I filed it. Not because I wanted Teo arrested, because I wanted documentation. My attorney had told me to document everything, and that's what I did. I documented the lock change. I documented the months of unpaid bills. I documented the Nando situation. I documented the night he told me to move out of my own house. I had a folder at home and a backup in my car and a third copy with my attorney. My father taught me to protect what was mine. My attorney taught me how. Teo didn't leave at the end of the month. I had to formally serve him with a notice to vacate. 30 days. My attorney drafted it and I handed it to Teo in the living room on a Tuesday evening. He read it slowly. He looked at the paper and then at me and said, this is really how you want this to end? I said, this ended the night you told me to move out of my father's house. He took the paper and called Delphina. She showed up at my door 40 minutes later. She drove across town at 8:30 at night to come defend her son's right to live in someone else's house. She walked in without being invited, without knocking, without taking off her shoes on the floor my father laid, and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where my father told me to protect this house. And she told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. She said no man would ever want a woman who treated her husband this way. She said I was controlling and cold and incapable of real partnership. She said her son deserved better. I let her finish. I let her say all of it because I wanted to hear every word so I could remember exactly what kind of woman thought her unemployed son had the right to ask his wife to leave her own inheritance. When she was done, I said, Delphina, your son did not work for 14 months. He did not pay a single bill for 23 months. He moved his friend into my house without asking. He changed the locks on a house he doesn't own. And tonight he told me to leave the home my dead father left me. If anyone in this room should be embarrassed, it's not me. She said I was going to die alone in this house surrounded by my father's furniture and my father's memory and nothing else. I said, I'd rather die alone in a house my father built for me than share it with a man who tried to take it from me. Delphina looked at me for a long time. Her mouth opened and closed twice. She had nothing left. She had used every weapon she had, guilt and shame and fear of being alone. And none of them worked because I was sitting in a house that belonged to me, paid for by a man who loved me enough to think 30 years into the future. Then she stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked to the door. On her way out, she said, you'll regret this. I said, I already regret 2 years of marriage. I won't regret this. Teo moved out 19 days later, not because he respected the notice, because Nando came and helped him move his things while I was at work. I came home and the closet was half empty and the couch was gone, which was fine because it was the couch he sat on for 14 months while I paid for his life, and the bathroom was cleared of his things. The guest towels were gone, which meant Nando's towels, the ones he left on my floor for 6 weeks. The gaming system was gone. The shoes that lived in a pile by the front door were gone. The takeout menus he kept pinned to the refrigerator with magnets were gone. He left the bed because it was mine. He left the kitchen table because it was mine. He left the dishes and the pots and the silverware because they were mine. He left the lawnmower in the garage because it was mine and he had never used it once in 2 years. He left the house because it was mine. He took what belonged to him and it all fit in the back of Nando's truck with the tailgate up. 2 years of marriage and everything he owned fit in one truck bed with room to spare. That told me everything I needed to know about what he brought into my life and what he took out of it. I walked through the house after he left. It was quieter than it had been in years. Not empty quiet, peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when something heavy has been removed and the house can settle back into itself. I opened every window and let the air move through every room. I stood in the kitchen kitchen and put my hand on the counter and just breathed. The divorce was fast. He didn't contest anything because there was nothing to contest. The house was mine. The car was mine. The savings account was mine. He came into the marriage with $11,000 in credit card debt and left with the same debt plus a car rental job and a couch that he'd worn a permanent dip into from 14 months of daily use. His attorney tried once to argue that Teo had contributed to the household by paying half the utilities during the first year. My attorney pulled out the documentation showing I had covered everything for the following 23 months, including $340 in takeout charges on my card that Teo never repaid, $180 in gas for his car during the months he wasn't working, and $2,400 in groceries that he consumed without contributing a single dollar toward. The judge didn't even let Teo's side finish the argument. Delphina was in the courtroom. She sat in the back row with her arms crossed and her purse on her lap, and she watched the whole thing without speaking. When the judge finalized the divorce, she stood up and walked out without looking at me. I heard later through a mutual friend that she told people I had stolen her son's home, the home he never owned, the home he never paid for, the home he tried to lock me out of. That was the story Delphina chose to tell, and it was exactly the kind of story I expected from a woman who raised a man to believe that other people's things were his by proximity. When it was final, I sat at my kitchen table with the divorce papers spread in front of me, and I looked at the chair across from me where Teo had sat the night he told me to move out. I looked at the chair next to it where my father had sat the day he told me to never put another name on this house. Two men sat at this table and said two very different things to me. One of them was trying to take something from me. The other was trying to make sure nobody ever could. My father knew. He knew before I did. He knew the kind of people who look at what you have and see what they're owed. He knew because he spent his whole life building something, and he wanted to make sure the person who inherited it understood what it was worth, not the dollar amount, the weight of it, the responsibility, the promise. I refinished the kitchen table that weekend, sanded the top down and restained it a shade darker than the original. It didn't need refinishing. The table was fine, but I wanted to put my hands on it. I wanted to feel the grain my father felt when he chose this piece of wood at the lumberyard 30 years ago. I wanted to do the work myself the way he would have, slowly, carefully, with attention to every inch. I sanded it down to bare wood and restained it a shade darker than the original and sealed it with 3 coats of polyurethane. I let each coat dry in the sunlight that comes through the window over the sink. The window he replaced because the draft bothered me. I sat at the table after the last coat dried and ran my hand across the surface, and it was smooth and warm and solid. The same table, different finish, stronger for having been stripped down and rebuilt. My coworker Elaine asked me a month after the divorce if I was doing okay. We were sitting in the hospital cafeteria on break, and she was looking at me over her coffee with the expression nurses give each other when they want to check on you without making it clinical. I said I was doing okay. She said, "Do you miss him?" I thought about it honestly. I thought about the couch being gone and how the living room looked bigger without it. I thought about the kitchen counter being clean when I came home because there were no takeout containers sitting on it. I thought about the bathroom floor being dry because there were no wet towels thrown in the corner. I thought about the silence of the house at night and whether it felt like loneliness or like something else. And I decided it felt like the latter. I said, I miss having someone to come home to, but I don't miss coming home to him. She nodded like that made perfect sense. She said, your dad would be proud of you. I didn't say anything. I just picked up my coffee and went back to work. I heard through a mutual friend that Delphina has been telling people I stole her son's home, the home he never owned, the home he never paid for, the home he tried to lock me out of. That's the story she chose to tell, and I expect nothing less from a woman who raised a man to believe that other people's things were his by proximity. Teo is living with Nando now, a 2-bedroom apartment across town. I don't know what he does there, and I don't care. I hope he's happy. I mean that. I hope he finds whatever it is he was looking for when he sat on my couch for 14 months and told me I wasn't being supportive enough. I hope someone gives it to him because I was never going to be the person who could. Last week I was sitting at that kitchen table eating dinner alone, and I looked at the empty chair across from me and I didn't feel sad. I felt settled, like the house had finally exhaled after holding its breath for 2 years, like the walls had relaxed, like the foundation could rest now that the only weight it carried was the weight it was always meant to hold. I paid off the last $6,200 of the mortgage in February. I wrote the check at that kitchen table and I held it for a minute before I put it in the envelope. My father would have done the same thing. He would have held it and looked at it and understood the weight of what it meant. The house is fully mine now. Every board, every tile, every window. No bank, no husband, no Delphina at my table telling me I owed her son something he never earned. No Nando on the couch. Just me and the walls my father built and the promise I kept.